Let me tell you something about myself. My name is Caleb, and I've always believed that hard work could solve just about any problem. That's the kind of man I was raised to be. Someone who puts his head down, grinds, and trusts that everything will fall into place. That mindset carried me through life and shaped how I approach just about everything, especially my marriage. When Clara and I first met, I thought I hit the jackpot. She had this vibrant energy, the kind that could light up a room. I remember the first time I saw her laugh. It was loud and unapologetic, the kind of laugh that made you want to join in even if you didn't know what was funny. She was the sort of woman you'd fight to keep, and I fought hard. I wasn't flashy or charming like some of the other guys she could have chosen, but I made up for it by showing her how dependable I was. I thought that mattered. You see, I've always been the kind of guy who believes actions speak louder than words. I didn't need to say, "I love you," a million times a day because I believed my efforts showed it. I worked long hours, saved money, and made sure she had everything she needed. I thought I was building a life for us, for her. But now I see that I might have misunderstood what it meant to truly be present in a marriage. Back then, I didn't see it. I thought I was doing everything right. I'd plan little surprises for her, flowers delivered to her work, weekend getaways to the mountains, or her favorite desserts after a tough day. But those moments became fewer and farther between as my work demands increased. There were days I'd come home so exhausted I couldn't muster more than a quick kiss on her forehead before collapsing into bed. I figured she understood, that she saw how much I was sacrificing to give us a good life. Love isn't about perfection, right? It's about trying. At least that's what I told myself. Lately, though, things had started to feel off. Clara was distant, but I brushed it aside. We've been married 2 years, and I figured we were just settling into the routine of married life. Every couple has rough patches, don't they? Deep down, though, I knew something wasn't right. Her laughter, God, I missed her laugh, had become rare. She spent more time scrolling through her phone than talking to me. But I didn't want to believe there was a deeper issue. I thought I could fix it. I just needed to try harder. That's why I decided to surprise her with a romantic dinner. I spent the whole afternoon preparing. Chicken parmesan with garlic mashed potatoes. It was the first meal I ever made for her, back when we were dating. She said it was her favorite, and I wanted to remind her of the good times. I even picked out a playlist of her favorite songs. It was my way of saying, I see you, I miss you, and I'm here. When she walked through the door, her reaction wasn't what I expected. There was surprise in her eyes, sure, but it felt muted, like she wasn't sure how to respond. She kissed my cheek and complimented the setup, but there was a hesitation in her voice I couldn't quite place. We sat down to eat, and for the first time in months, the conversation flowed easily. She laughed, really laughed, and for a moment, I thought, maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. But then came the wine. 3 glasses in, Clara started to loosen up. At first, I didn't think much of it. She leaned back in her chair, her words coming slower, her expression softer. I thought she was finally relaxing, letting her guard down. But then she set her glass down, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "You're a nice guy, Caleb. That's why I'm here with you." Nice guy. The words felt wrong, like a consolation prize. I forced a smile and asked, "What do you mean?" My voice was steady, but my stomach was already in knots. She laughed. Not the laugh I loved, but something colder, almost pitying. I mean, I've never really been attracted to you. Not in that way. It hit me like a freight train, but she wasn't done. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand like we were having a casual conversation. "You're sweet, safe, dependable, but you're not my type." She went on to describe what her type was. Someone rougher, darker, more dangerous. The complete opposite of me. And then she dropped the real bomb. When I met him, my type, I just couldn't resist. One thing led to another. Her voice trailed off, but she didn't need to finish. I knew. I sat there, nodding like a fool, while my wife poured out truths that shattered me. This wasn't an apology. It wasn't regret. It was justification. Like she wanted me to understand her reasons for betraying me. Something in me snapped. Not in an angry, yelling kind of way. No, I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. I just let her finish. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need to fight. I didn't need to explain or justify myself. I just needed to decide what to do next. That night, lying in bed next to her, listening to her soft snores, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just clarity. By sunrise, I knew there was no going back. When the sun rose that morning, it wasn't the warm glow of a new day. It was the spotlight exposing the wreckage of my life. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of Clara's breathing. How could she sleep so soundly after what she said? After admitting, without a hint of remorse, that I wasn't her type and she had found what she wanted elsewhere? It wasn't just her betrayal that stung. It was her indifference. But something had shifted in me that night. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even heartbroken anymore. I was done. Now, I'm not the kind of man who makes decisions on impulse. I don't fly off the handle or act on emotions. When I move with purpose. Clara didn't deserve a fight. She didn't deserve my anger or even an explanation. No, the best thing I could do was disappear from her life as quietly as she had discarded me in her heart. I got up from the bed and walked to the kitchen. The same table where she had confessed her lack of attraction to me now held the remnants of the dinner I had so carefully prepared. The candles had burned out, leaving trails of wax on the tablecloth. The wine glasses were still half full. I looked at the mess and thought, that's our marriage in a nutshell. Effort on one side, carelessness on the other. I started making a mental checklist. First, the practicalities, finances, legal steps, and cutting all ties. Then, the personal, my family, my friends, my next steps. I didn't feel rushed or panicked, just focused. I called my lawyer as soon as his office opened. I laid it all out for him, calm and matter of fact. File the papers, I said, and I want everything set up to separate our finances. I don't want her touching another dime of my money. He tried to probe, asking if I was sure or if I wanted to wait and talk things over with her. But I cut him off. This isn't a discussion. Just get it done. Next, I called my accountant. I told him to start liquidating my shares in the investments Clara and I had jointly owned. I wasn't about to let her walk away with control over what I had worked so hard to build. He worked quickly. He always did. And by the end of the day, the accounts were empty. Everything had been moved into a separate trust under my name. Clara would wake up to find herself cut off. But the hardest call wasn't to the lawyer or the accountant. It was to my family. They've always been my safety net, my moral compass. Telling them what had happened wasn't easy. Don't give her any information about me, I told them. If she calls, tell her nothing. She's not a part of my life anymore. My mother, bless her, started to cry, asking me if I was okay. I wasn't, but I didn't want her to worry. I will be, I said. Just promise me you won't let her drag you into this. They agreed, reluctantly, but I knew they'd stand by me. As I packed a suitcase, I noticed the little things. A pair of socks Clara had left on the floor. The throw pillow she always insisted on keeping on the couch, even though it served no purpose. Her perfume lingering in the air. Each one was a reminder of the life we had built, or at least the life I thought we had. But I wasn't angry. I was ready to leave it all behind. I left no note, no goodbye. I didn't owe her that. What could I possibly say? That I loved her despite everything? That I hoped she found what she was looking for? No. She had made her choice, and I was making mine. Before I walked out, I paused by the doorway. I looked back at the house one last time. It wasn't just a building. It was the symbol of every late night, every early morning, every sacrifice I had made to build a future for us. But now it felt empty, hollow, a shell of what I thought it was. I didn't feel sadness, though. I felt freedom. I stepped outside and took a deep breath. The air was cool, crisp, and filled with the quiet hum of the world waking up. I got into my car and drove off, not looking back once. As the house disappeared in my rearview mirror, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was like I had been holding my breath for years, and I could finally exhale. That day, as I sat in a coffee shop waiting for my lawyer to send over the first draft of the divorce papers, I thought about the man I was becoming. I wasn't running away. I was reclaiming my life. Clara might think she had one, that she had broken me. But the truth was, she had set me free. The funny thing about leaving is that it doesn't feel real at first. You half expect someone to call you, to beg you to come back, to fight for you. But Clara didn't call. Not that morning, not that afternoon. She didn't even notice I was gone. Maybe that hurt the most, that her betrayal wasn't just about another man. It was about the fact that I had become invisible to her long before she ever admitted it. But that was fine. I didn't need her to notice. I didn't need her to care. I was done waiting for her to value me. And as I sat there sipping my coffee, I made a promise to myself. I would never let anyone make me feel this small again. After I left, I thought the hardest part was over. I'd made my decision, I'd walked away, and I was starting to build the scaffolding for a new life. What I didn't realize was that the betrayal ran deeper than I initially understood. It wasn't just Clara's words that cut me. It was everything I discovered in the days that followed. The first crack came when I sat down with my lawyer. We were going over the usual details: division of assets, financial accounts, property rights. We need a clear picture of all joint finances, he said, flipping through a stack of documents. I nodded, assuming this would be a simple matter. We had a shared account for household expenses, and I figured everything was straightforward. I was wrong. As we combed through the records, patterns started to emerge. There were withdrawals I couldn't explain, large sums that didn't add up to any bills or household purchases. Then there were the credit card charges, high-end restaurants I'd never heard of, spa appointments she never mentioned, and boutique shopping sprees that would have made my accountant wince. My jaw tightened as I realized these expenses weren't random. They were deliberate. Clara had been funding her double life right under my nose. But it got worse. One charge stood out: a weekend stay at a luxury hotel in the city. A hotel I'd never set foot in. I didn't need to ask who she went with. The betrayal was already etched into every receipt, every transaction. It wasn't just money. It was the realization that she had been living this life, carefree and unburdened, while I was grinding away at work, thinking I was building something for us. I told myself I'd had enough for one day, but curiosity gnawed at me. I needed to know the full extent of what had happened. That night, I went through the house, searching for anything that might shed more light on what she'd been doing. I wasn't looking for closure. I already had that. I just wanted to understand how blind I'd been. In the back of her closet, I found a shoebox stuffed with receipts, cards, and little mementos. My hands shook as I opened it. There were handwritten notes that weren't from me, theater tickets from shows I'd never attended, and photos. Yes, photos of her with another man. The worst part? She looked happy. Genuinely, unapologetically happy. The kind of happy I hadn't seen in her eyes in years. I sat there for a long time, staring at the evidence of her betrayal. I thought back to all the times I'd brushed off her coldness, chalking it up to stress or routine. I thought about the nights I'd come home late, too exhausted to talk, and the mornings I'd left early, telling myself I was doing it for us. All the while, she'd been living a life I wasn't even a part of. The next day, I met with my accountant. I told him to freeze any accounts Clara might have access to. He raised an eyebrow but didn't question me. "She's going to notice," he said. "Good," I replied. "She should." As the days went on, I started piecing together more details. A mutual acquaintance, someone who hadn't yet realized I'd left Clara, mentioned seeing her at a gallery opening with a friend. I didn't ask for more information. I didn't need to. The truth was already clear, and every new detail only confirmed what I already knew. I had been a convenience for her, a safety net she could fall back on while she chased whatever thrills she wanted elsewhere. I thought I'd feel rage. I thought I'd want to confront her, to scream, to demand answers. But I didn't. I felt hollow. Betrayal has a way of numbing you, of stripping you down to the bare essentials of who you are. I realized I didn't need an apology or an explanation from Clara. What could she possibly say that would make any of this better? The only thing I needed was to take back control of my life. And that's exactly what I did. I took a cold, calculated approach to the situation. I finalized the divorce papers, ensuring that every asset I'd built was secured in my name. I liquidated the investments we'd shared and moved the funds into accounts she couldn't touch. I sold off the joint property we owned. Most of it was tied to her anyway. and used the proceeds to create a new foundation for myself. One part of me, the part that still clung to the man I used to be, wanted to feel bad for cutting her off so thoroughly. But then I remembered her words, "You're not my type." She didn't feel bad when she said it. She didn't feel bad when she spent my money on her type, or used me as her safety net. So why should I feel bad now? By the end of the week, I had done what I set out to do. Clara was locked out of every financial avenue she once relied on. The accounts were empty, the investments were gone, and the house we once shared was no longer hers to call home. The first time she tried to contact me, I ignored her. She sent a text, just one. "We need to talk." I stared at the screen for a moment before deleting it. There was nothing left to say. I didn't need to hear her excuses or her justifications. She had shown me exactly who she was, and I believed her. Looking back, I realized this part of the process wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishing Clara for what she did. It was about reclaiming my power, my dignity, and my sense of self. Betrayal cuts deep, but it also clarifies things. It shows you who you can trust, who you can't, and, most importantly, who you are when everything else falls away. The thing about leaving someone isn't just about walking away. It's about the fallout, the chain reaction that starts the moment you decide you're done. You think you've prepared yourself for everything, but trust me, there's always something that surprises you. For me, it was Clara's reaction. At first, there was silence. I don't know if she even noticed I was gone that morning. Maybe she assumed I just left for work, like always. But as the hours ticked by and she realized I wasn't coming back, the messages started. The first text came late in the afternoon. "Hey, are you okay? I haven't heard from you all day." Innocent enough, right? I ignored it. A couple of hours later, another text. "Where are you? I'm starting to worry." Worry? That made me laugh. She didn't worry about me when she was out with her type, did she? By the time the evening rolled around, her tone had shifted. "Caleb, this isn't funny. Call me." The messages kept coming, each one more frantic than the last. I didn't respond to a single one. What was there to say? That I was finally done being her safety net? That I wasn't interested in her half-hearted attempts to reel me back in? No, I'd said everything I needed to by walking out the door. The calls started the next day. She must have realized something was seriously wrong because she called everyone. My phone, my family, even my lawyer. My parents were the first to text me about it. "Clara's been calling. She's really upset. Are you sure this is what you want?" "Don't engage with her," I told them. "She's not your problem. She's not mine anymore either." My mom didn't like that answer. She's always been the type to believe in forgiveness, in working things out. But even she couldn't argue when I told her what Clara had said, what Clara had done. She just sighed and said, "Okay, we won't get involved." The thing about Clara is that she doesn't take no for an answer. Not easily, anyway. When the texts and calls didn't work, she showed up at my lawyer's office. He called me immediately after. "She was here, demanding to know where you are," he said. "She claims there's been some kind of misunderstanding." I laughed when he told me that. Misunderstanding? No, there was no misunderstanding. Clara had been perfectly clear the night she confessed she wasn't attracted to me, that she'd been seeing someone else. She didn't stutter when she told me I wasn't her type. What more was there to understand? Still, I couldn't help but wonder what she thought she could accomplish. Did she think showing up at my lawyer's office would make me come running back? Did she think she could cry her way out of this? The audacity of it all was almost amusing. But here's the thing about people like Clara. They don't give up easily, especially when their comfort is at stake. When she realized she couldn't reach me directly, she turned to damage control. She started telling mutual friends that I'd left her out of the blue, that I was being unreasonable. She spun a story where she was the victim, the wife who just wanted to fix her marriage while her husband ran away. One of those mutual friends, a guy named Jared, called me to check in. He told me Clara had been saying I overreacted, that she'd been misunderstood, and was trying to make things right. I didn't bother correcting him. Why should I waste my breath explaining myself to someone who wasn't there, who didn't know the full story? Let her tell whatever lies she needed to tell to save face. It didn't matter to me. What did matter was the sudden shift in her behavior. When she realized her pleas weren't working, the mask came off. The text stopped being frantic and started being angry. "How could you do this to me?" she wrote. "After everything we've been through, you're just going to throw it all away?" I deleted every message without reading more than the first line. The calls became less frequent, but the bitterness in her voice was palpable. She left a voicemail once, just once, that I actually listened to. In it, she called me selfish, heartless, and accused me of overreacting. "You're punishing me for one mistake," she said, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and desperation. "I don't deserve this." That was the part that got me. She didn't deserve this? What exactly did she think I deserved? To sit there and pretend I wasn't shattered by her betrayal? To keep playing the role of the dutiful husband while she chased her fantasies with someone else? No, she deserved exactly what she got, a taste of life without me. By the end of the first week, the fallout was complete. Clara had exhausted every avenue to reach me, and I had made it clear there was no going back. I knew she wasn't done. People like her never are. But I also knew she was starting to feel the weight of what she'd lost. And that, more than any angry text or voicemail, was the true fallout. Not the messages, not the calls, but the silence that followed when she realized I wasn't coming back. Sometimes the loudest thing you can say to someone is nothing at all. Here's the thing about people like Clara. They think they're untouchable. They believe the world will always bend to accommodate them, that there will always be a soft place to land no matter how far they fall. But life doesn't work that way, and for Clara, the cracks in her fantasy world started showing much faster than even I expected. At first, she tried to pretend everything was fine. That's what I heard, anyway. A mutual friend, Hannah, told me Clara was throwing herself into her new life, flaunting her freedom like a badge of honor. "She's been going out a lot," Hannah said. "Dinners, parties, shopping sprees. Honestly, it seems like she's having the time of her life." I didn't respond to that. I didn't need to. If Clara wanted to pretend she was thriving without me, that was her prerogative. But I knew better. That kind of bravado doesn't last. Eventually, the truth catches up with you. It started with the money. You see, Clara wasn't exactly what you'd call financially responsible. She'd always had expensive tastes, designer clothes, fancy dinners, spontaneous weekend getaways. When we were together, I never thought much of it. I figured it was just her way of enjoying life, and I worked hard enough to make sure we could afford it. But now, without me footing the bill, those indulgences quickly turned into liabilities. The settlement money I gave her, more than generous, by the way, should have lasted her years. She could have used it to build a solid foundation, maybe even start over. But instead, she spent it like it was a prize she'd won. Within months, it was gone. Every penny. I heard this through the grapevine, of course. Clara wasn't about to admit it to me directly, but mutual acquaintances started whispering about her growing debts and mounting financial troubles. Then came the rumors about the new guy. "You remember the type she told me about? The rougher, darker guy who wasn't afraid to break the rules?" Well, apparently, he wasn't afraid to break promises either. Clara had been dating someone, a guy who fit her ideal to a T, and things seemed to be going well. That is, until she got pregnant. When I first heard about the pregnancy, I didn't feel anything. No anger, no pity, no satisfaction, just nothing. It was like hearing about a stranger's life, distant and irrelevant. But the details trickled in, and they painted a bleak picture. The father? He bailed the moment she told him. No calls, no texts, no explanations. Just gone. She was left to deal with it on her own. And for someone like Clara, who thrived on external validation, the isolation must have been crushing. But it didn't stop there. The financial strain, the pregnancy, the abandonment, it all compounded into one big mess. She had to sell the house we'd shared. Her house now, technically, just to cover her debts. I can only imagine how that felt for her, watching the last tangible piece of our life together slip through her fingers. And then there were her friends, or what was left of them. You see, Clara had always surrounded herself with people who were just like her. Shallow, self-serving, and only interested in the good times. When those good times ran out, so did they. One by one, they disappeared, leaving her to fend for herself. She reached out to them for help. Money, babysitting, even just someone to talk to, but the door was always closed. I guess even her best stories couldn't keep them entertained anymore. By the time her baby was born, Clara was completely alone. No partner, no friends, no financial security. Just her and the consequences of the choices she'd made. I heard she'd moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town, scraping by on whatever work she could find. The woman who once sneered at the idea of living a boring life was now living one out of necessity. The strangest part? I didn't feel sorry for her. Not even a little. I wasn't sitting around, rubbing my hands together in celebration of her downfall. I just didn't care. Her life was her life now, and I was no longer a part of it. She'd made her choices, and she was living with them. That's how it works. Still, I couldn't help but marvel at the irony. Clara had told me she wanted freedom, excitement, passion. She wanted to live the life she thought she deserved. But that kind of freedom comes with a price. She thought she could have it all without consequences, but life doesn't let you cheat the system. Eventually, it demands payment. The last I heard about her came from Hannah. She's struggling, Hannah said. But honestly, I think she's too proud to admit how bad it really is. Pride, I replied, is a luxury she can't afford anymore. And that was the end of it. I didn't ask for more details. I didn't need to. Clara's story wasn't my story anymore, and I wasn't interested in being a spectator to her downfall. My focus was on building something new, something better, something that didn't revolve around someone who had treated me like an afterthought. People like Clara always think they're escaping something when, really, they're running straight into a wall. And when that wall hits, there's no one left to catch them. Leaving Clara wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something I hadn't fully anticipated. The long, winding road back to myself. You don't walk out of a marriage, no matter how broken, and immediately feel whole again. That's not how it works. The truth is, even when you know you made the right choice, there's still a part of you that feels like you're wandering, like you're trying to find your footing on unfamiliar ground. The first few weeks after I left were the hardest. I didn't miss Clara, not really, but I missed the idea of what we were supposed to be. I missed the version of her I had built up in my head, the version that cared, that laughed with me, that wanted the same future I did. But every time those thoughts crept in, I reminded myself of the truth. That version of her never really existed. I started small. At first, it was just about creating a routine, something to fill the hours that used to be consumed by work and trying to salvage a one-sided marriage. I joined a gym, not because I wanted to reinvent myself physically, but because I needed somewhere to channel the pent-up energy, the frustration, the restlessness. It was humbling, showing up day after day, feeling out of place among the regulars who seemed to know exactly what they were doing. But with every session, I felt a little stronger, a little more in control. Then there were the hobbies. You know what's funny? I couldn't even remember the last time I'd done something just for fun. For years, my life had been about ticking boxes. Career, marriage, responsibilities. But now, with no one else's expectations weighing me down, I started to rediscover the things I used to love. I picked up an old guitar that had been collecting dust in the back of my closet. At first, my fingers fumbled over the strings, but the muscle memory kicked in eventually, and it felt like reconnecting with an old friend. Travel was another thing I'd always put on hold. Clara and I used to talk about going places, Paris, Tokyo, Cape Town, but it was always just talk. There was never time, or the budget didn't align with her priorities, which usually meant it didn't involve shopping or a luxury spa. Now, I didn't have to wait for anyone else to be ready. I booked a solo trip to the mountains, packed a bag, and left. For the first time in years, I felt free. Sitting by a crackling fire under a sky full of stars, I realized I hadn't been truly alone with my thoughts in ages. It was uncomfortable at first, confronting everything I'd been ignoring about myself, but it was also necessary. One of the most unexpected parts of my journey was reconnecting with people I'd lost touch with, friends I hadn't spoken to in years, not because we'd fallen out, but because I'd been too consumed with work and trying to make my marriage work. I reached out to them, tentatively at first, unsure if they'd even want to hear from me. But to my surprise, they welcomed me back like no time had passed. Those conversations reminded me of who I was before Clara, before I let my identity get swallowed up by someone else's needs. Work, too, became a different kind of refuge. For years, it had been my primary focus, the thing I poured myself into to avoid dealing with the cracks in my personal life. Now, I saw it as an opportunity, not just to succeed, but to redefine what success meant to me. I started saying no to projects that didn't align with my values. I stopped chasing every promotion and instead focused on the kind of work that felt fulfilling. And you know what? My career didn't fall apart because of it. If anything, I became better at what I did because I wasn't running on empty anymore. About 6 months after I left, I got an offer for a job in another city. It wasn't a huge leap up the corporate ladder, but it was a chance to start fresh, to leave behind the physical reminders of my old life. The house, the neighborhood, even the grocery store where Clara and I used to shop, all of it held memories I didn't need. So I packed up, moved into a small apartment downtown, and started over. That move was pivotal. It was the first time I truly felt like I was living for myself, not for someone else's expectations or approval. My apartment wasn't much, a one-bedroom with squeaky floors and a view of a parking lot, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every decision was mine to make. It was a blank canvas, and I could paint whatever picture I wanted. Healing isn't linear, though. There were still bad days, days when I felt the weight of everything I'd been through. Sometimes it was triggered by something small, a couple laughing together in a park, a love song playing on the radio. But instead of pushing those feelings away, I let myself sit with them. I didn't try to rush through the process or pretend I was fine when I wasn't. I gave myself permission to feel everything, even the uncomfortable parts. The most surprising thing about this whole journey was how it changed my perspective on love. I used to think love was about sacrifice, about giving everything you had to someone else. But now I realize it's about balance. It's about mutual respect, about both people showing up and putting in the effort. Love isn't supposed to drain you. It's supposed to fill you up. Looking back, I don't regret what happened with Clara. It taught me more about myself than I ever could have learned otherwise. I'm not the same man I was when I walked out that door, and for that, I'm grateful. Losing her wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a better one. It happened on a quiet Saturday afternoon. I was sitting by the window in my apartment, a book in my hands, the kind of day I'd come to cherish since leaving Clara. Life was simple now. No drama, no pretenses, just peace. Then the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. My circle of friends was still small, and I hadn't told many people about my new address. Curious, I set the book down and walked to the door. When I opened it, I froze. There she was. Clara. She looked almost the same, but not quite. Her hair was done, her outfit was polished, and she still carried herself with that air of confidence that used to draw me to her. But her eyes, they gave her away. They weren't the sharp, knowing eyes I remembered. They were tired, searching, almost pleading. I could tell she'd rehearsed this moment in her head, probably a dozen times. But now that she was standing in front of me, she hesitated. "Caleb," she said, her voice low and unsteady. "I've been trying to find you for years." Years. I hadn't realized it had been that long. Time had moved differently for me. Each day another step away from the wreckage of my old life. For her, it seemed, time had been an anchor, keeping her trapped in the mess she'd created. I didn't say anything. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, waiting for her to continue. She squirmed under my gaze, fidgeting with the strap of her purse. The silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable, until she finally broke it. I needed to tell you how sorry I am," she stammered. "I made a terrible mistake, Caleb. A mistake that's haunted me every single day since you left." I raised an eyebrow but kept quiet. Her words hung in the air, desperate and raw, but I wasn't about to make this easy for her. I wanted to see where she was going with this. She took a shaky breath and kept going. "I thought I could have it all. I thought I could find excitement somewhere else and still keep you. But I didn't realize what I had until it was gone. Until you were gone." Her voice cracked on that last word, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I once loved. But I also saw the woman who had betrayed me, the one who had laughed at my attempts to rekindle our marriage, who had called me nice, as if it were an insult. That memory kept me grounded, kept me from feeling anything other than detached. She started telling me about her life, how it had fallen apart after I left. She talked about the financial struggles, the debt, the friends who abandoned her. She admitted that the man she'd left me for, her so-called type, had vanished when she told him she was pregnant. She had been left to raise a child on her own, and it had been harder than she ever imagined. "I've paid for my mistakes, Caleb," she said, tears streaming down her face now. "Every single day, I've paid for them, but I need you to know that I never stopped thinking about you. I never stopped needing you." That word, need, struck a nerve. Not love. Not care. Need. As if I were a safety net she could fall back into, the solution to her problems. But I wasn't that man anymore. I wasn't hers to need. I leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with her. "You made your choice," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You told me I wasn't your type, remember? That I wasn't enough for you. Well, I believed you, and I moved on." She flinched, as if my words had physically struck her. "Caleb, please," she whispered. "I know I was wrong. I was selfish and I hurt you. But I've changed. I've learned my lesson. Can't we try again?" Her tears might have worked on me once, but not anymore. I didn't feel anger or pity, just clarity. This wasn't about love or reconciliation. This was about her desperation, her inability to cope with the consequences of her actions. She wanted me to save her, but I'd already done that once, and she threw it away. "I don't care what you regret," I said, my voice steady. "I don't care how much you've suffered. That's your burden to carry, not mine. You wanted freedom. You got it. Now live with it." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might say something else. But instead, she just nodded, defeated. I stepped back, gripping the door. "Don't come back," I said. "There's nothing for you here." And with that, I closed the door. I stood there for a moment, my hand still on the doorknob, listening to her footsteps fade away. When I finally walked back to the window, I looked outside and saw her getting into a car. She sat there for a while, her head bowed, before driving off. It should have felt like closure, but it didn't. Not really. Closure isn't something someone else can give you. It's something you give yourself. And I'd already done that. Seeing her again didn't change anything. If anything, it reminded me of how far I'd come, how much I'd grown since the day I walked away. Some people say forgiveness is the key to moving on. Maybe they're right. But forgiveness doesn't always mean letting someone back into your life. Sometimes it means letting go, not for their sake, but for your own. And that's exactly what I did. After Clara left my doorstep that day, I thought I'd seen the last of her. But life has a funny way of testing your resolve, and I should have known she wasn't finished. Clara wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly, even when she was the one who caused her own downfall. The messages started again. Emails this time, long, rambling ones filled with apologies and self-pity. She wrote about how much she'd changed, how motherhood had humbled her, how she'd come to realize that I was the only person who had ever truly cared about her. I didn't respond. What was the point? There was nothing left to say. A few weeks later, she showed up again. I was leaving my apartment, headed to work, when I saw her standing by my car. She looked more put together this time. No tears, no trembling hands. Just a calm, calculated expression that told me she'd rehearsed whatever speech she was about to give. "Caleb," she began, stepping forward. I held up a hand to stop her. "Clara," I said, my tone flat, "you shouldn't be here." "Please, just hear me out," she insisted, her voice soft but insistent. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've made mistakes. But I'm trying to make things right." I sighed, unlocking my car door. "And what does a making things right look like to you? Do you want me to forget everything you did? Pretend it never happened? Go back to the way things were?" She flinched at my words, but she didn't back down. "No, I don't expect you to forget," she said. "But I'm asking for a second chance. I'm asking for forgiveness." I stared at her for a long moment, and for the first time, I didn't see the woman I once loved. I saw someone desperate, someone grasping at straws, Someone who still didn't understand the weight of her actions. Forgiveness? Sure, I could forgive her. But forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. It didn't mean I'd welcome her back into my life with open arms. You think this is about forgiveness? I asked, leaning against the car. You think one apology erases everything you said, everything you did? Clara, this isn't a misunderstanding. You made it clear who you are and what you value, and I'm not interested in going back to that. Her face crumpled, but she kept pressing. I've changed, Caleb. I'm not the same person I was back then. I've been through so much. I've learned so much. Can't we at least talk about it? Talk about what? I shot back. How you spent years lying to me. How you threw me away because I wasn't exciting enough for you. Clara, you made your choice. You chose someone else, and when that didn't work out, you came crawling back. Do you have any idea how that looks? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't stop. You didn't want me when I was building a life for us. You didn't value me when I was doing everything I could to make you happy. But now that your world has fallen apart, I'm suddenly good enough? No, that's not how this works. She broke then, tears spilling down her cheeks as she whispered, I don't know what else to say. There's nothing left to say, I replied. This isn't about me being bitter or angry. I'm not either of those things. This is about self-respect. And I respect myself too much to let you back into my life. For a moment, I thought she might argue, might try to convince me one last time. But instead, she nodded, wiping at her face. I understand, she said quietly. I wanted you to know how sorry I am. I nodded back, stepping into my car. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said. But it won't be with me. And with that, I closed the door and drove away. As I pulled onto the main road, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For years, I'd been carrying the weight of Clara's betrayal, the questions, the what-ifs. But in that moment, I realized I didn't need her validation or her apology. I didn't need closure from her because I'd already given it to myself. People talk about closure like it's something someone else can give you, but that's a lie. Closure isn't a gift, it's a decision. It's choosing to let go, to stop looking back, to stop waiting for an explanation that will never satisfy you. And I had made that choice long before Clara showed up at my door. As the miles stretched out behind me, I thought about the man I'd become. I wasn't perfect, far from it, but I was stronger, wiser, more self-assured. Losing Clara had been painful, yes, but it had also been necessary. Sometimes the hardest things in life are the ones that set you free. By the time I reached my office, I wasn't thinking about Clara anymore. I was thinking about the future, about the life I was building, about the peace I'd fought so hard to achieve. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. It's funny how life works. When you're in the middle of heartbreak, it feels like the world is ending. The pain is so sharp, so all-consuming, that it's hard to imagine a future where it doesn't hurt anymore. But one day, you wake up, and the ache has dulled. And then one day after that, it's gone. Not all at once, not like some magic trick, but gradually, like a bruise fading from your skin. That's how it was for me after Clara. I won't lie and say it was easy. It wasn't. There were days when the memories crept in uninvited, when I'd replay conversations in my head and wonder if I could have done something differently. But those days became fewer and farther between. Over time, I stopped asking why and started asking what's next. The most important lesson I learned from all of this was about self-worth. For so long, I had tied my value to what I could give to others. My time, my effort, my money. I thought that being a good husband meant sacrificing everything for Clara, even when it left me with nothing for myself. But I've come to realize that love isn't about losing yourself in someone else. It's about balance, about mutual respect, about two people building each other up instead of tearing each other down. Another lesson? People will show you who they are if you're willing to see it. Clara showed me who she was long before she ever said those hurtful words at dinner. I ignored the signs because I didn't want to believe them. I wanted so badly for us to work that I convinced myself things would get better if I just tried harder. But love isn't a one-sided effort. It's a partnership, and if one person isn't willing to meet you halfway, it's not love, it's a burden. Moving on wasn't just about letting go of Clara. It was about letting go of the man I was when I was with her. The man who thought working harder would fix everything. The man who put someone else's needs above his own, even when it was clear they didn't value him. That man served his purpose, but it was time to leave him behind, too. Starting over wasn't glamorous. There was no grand epiphany, no dramatic transformation. It was quiet, steady, and in a way, humbling. I learned to enjoy my own company again. I found joy in the little things, watching the sunrise with a cup of coffee, reading a good book on a rainy afternoon, taking long walks without a destination in mind. I stopped chasing the kind of happiness that depended on someone else and started creating my own. Eventually, I opened myself up to new relationships, not just romantic ones, but friendships too. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones, people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. These relationships felt lighter, freer, because they weren't built on obligation or guilt. They were built on mutual respect and shared laughter. And yes, there was someone new. It didn't happen right away, and it wasn't something I was actively looking for. She came into my life when I least expected it, during a volunteer event at a local community center. Her name was Elise, and she had this quiet strength about her that drew me in. She didn't need me to prove anything or be someone I wasn't. With her, everything felt easy, natural. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen, not as a provider or a fixer, but as a person. Elise and I took things slow. We spent months getting to know each other, sharing stories about our pasts, our dreams, our fears. She knew about Clara, of course, and she listened without judgment. "What matters," she said one night, "is that you didn't let it break you." And she was right. I hadn't let it break me. If anything, it had built me into someone stronger, someone more aware of what I deserved. Looking back, I don't regret my time with Clara. It shaped me, taught me lessons I might not have learned otherwise. But I don't dwell on it, either. She's a chapter in my story, one that I've closed for good. My focus is on the chapters ahead, the ones I get to write on my own terms. So, here's my advice to anyone who finds themselves in a situation like mine. Don't settle for less than you deserve. Don't let someone else's inability to see your worth convince you that you're not enough. Walking away is hard, trust me, I know, but sometimes it's the only way to find peace. And peace, once you find it, is worth everything. As for me, I'm not the same man I was when I walked out of that house all those years ago. I'm better, stronger, happier, and for the first time in my life, I'm living not for someone else, but for myself. So, if you ever find yourself at a crossroads, unsure of whether to stay or go, ask yourself this. Are you choosing them because they make you happy, or because you're afraid of being alone? If it's the latter, I promise you, there's nothing lonelier than being with someone who doesn't value you. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away. And sometimes, the best thing you can do for someone who hurt you is to let them live with the consequences of losing you.